Update 50 is here, so I thought it'd be fun to rank every DPS class for organized in-game groups. And a quick disclaimer, this is my subjective list. I'm talking about coordinated groups, building comps on purpose, not pugs or random dungeon finder groups. This is also not meant to exclude anybody from raids. Every class is usable in Update 50, which is a huge improvement from Update 49. This is more about the top end optimization, where DPS players are usually expected to flex between multiple classes depending on what the group needs. I'm also assuming the group is willing to solve normal group building problems like penetration, crit damage, those kind of things. So they're not automatic deal breakers here. Supports can adjust sets, and DPS players can usually make small build tweaks without losing much overall damage to adjust for those kind of things. Every trial and every dungeon can shift this list quite a bit, but this is where I'd rank things today for sweaty in-game groups trying to kill stuff fast. Let's get into it. Up first and in D tier is the Templar. This has lower single target damage, decent cleave, good execute damage, but terrible sustain. It brings a few good support options, has an interesting class mastery with adding 300 weapon damage to everybody. Still, in the right hands, it can do decent damage. And there is going to be fights where execute is the main thing, and this will still definitely work. Then in C tier, we have the Dragon Knight. This has okay single target damage, pretty good cleave. It can Zenkosh or just use Zens pretty well and keep that up really well. This is probably a staple support role in almost every group to use Zens and Alkosh, Zenkosh, especially now that all these pure classes don't really have penetration. The damage is sitting at about the same overall as Templar. I think DK just has a little bit more going for it in terms of what it can bring, what support sets it can run, and just overall usability. And the next, talking about penetration, is Arcanist. I'm putting that also in C tier, ahead of DK. This has lower single target damage, but pretty good cleave, and it can bring major force for the whole group with the new class mastery passive and reaving blows together. You can keep it up 100% by yourself. And this is also the safe option for progs with Pragmatic Beam with the damage shield, but it does have kind of low execute damage. Then up next and in B tier, we got Wardens. This has great single target and good cleave. The downside that in most builds that do a really high damage is missing out on the ult gen buffs and the crazy amount of ult gen that's happening in Update 50, and that's because it's using Signet. However, this can support with Zens pretty well if needed, but it does have lower execute damage. It's really just a little higher on the list than these guys because it has better single target damage overall, but the overall usability isn't quite as good. So honestly, for this part of the list, these four down here, they can really get flipped around a lot depending on the trial, depending on what's needed. Then after that, also in B tier, ahead of the Warden though, is Sork. This has a really good single target. Really bad cleave though. But this can also support in a lot of ways. It's a great class for running martial knowledge. It can bring calculated defense. It doesn't have to run Signet, but when it does, that has a ton of single target damage. It can work around the missing out on ult gen thing that Wardens have, because it can toggle off the ultimate, get that ult gen back, and then toggle it back on. It's a lot to coordinate that, and most groups probably aren't going to get the most out of it. So most likely it is missing out on that alt gen stuff from Crypt and Pillagers. But it has really good execute damage even without having an execute because of static reverb. So yeah, B tier for Sork. Then the first thing in the A tier is going to be Werewolf. I know it's not a class in its own and every class can be a werewolf, but really people are treating this as a totally separate class and separate thing because this can bring a unique damage buff, 6% damage done via a synergy that it can proc on itself, which also means it can run Alkosh really well because it has that self-supplied synergy, and it brings major courage for the whole group. So that really changes up what the healers now bring. They don't have to bring SPC or those kind of things for major courage. So it adds a whole nother set that the supports can run. It also has absurd execute damage without a dedicated execute. And it's a super easy rotation, so I think this is going to make Endgame a lot more viable for a lot more players. Then we have the two top dogs of the patch. First, Nightblade. This has great single target, and if you can weave exceptionally well, this has just incredible damage. It doesn't have great cleave, which is why it's not number one, but it is probably the best overall execute damage with just all the different crit damage stuff it has in Killer's Blade. and several of the damage skills benefit from things like Morg Tongue and stuff like that. So Nightblade is just insane this patch. But then right squeaking ahead of them is Necro. This has the by far best cleave, near the best single target. The damage is disease damage, which is buffed by Morg Tongue, which means the dummy's not even showing the full damage. The only real drawback to Necro right now is that it has a little bit lower penetration. So most of the time, you'll probably need to wear a one-piece light or a one-piece light scoria or something like that. It also has just absurd execute damage scaling without an execute. So Necro really has everything going for it in update 50. So looking at this list, I think the biggest takeaway is that class balance is in a pretty good spot right now. Necro ended up at the top for me and Templar ended up at the bottom, but the gap between those classes is a lot smaller than it was in update 49. And also, just every class in this list has a reason to exist, a reason to play. Some are better at single target, some are better at cleave, some are better at support, some are better at parsing, some are safer. So all that said, if you're a DPS player, I strongly recommend learning multiple classes, being able to flex to a different class when needed. That's always going to be more valuable than trying to force one class into every situation. But if you're worried your favorite class is dead in update 50, I just don't think that's the case at all. That's it. That's my incredibly subjective personal DPS list. Thanks so much for watching. See you in update 50. Peace.